What if the galaxy decided you were too dangerous to be allowed a future? Not because of your weapons, but because you learned how to stand together. It begins without warning. Trade routes vanish. Colonies go silent. Entire systems are cut off, not by invasion, but by exhaustion. An alien coalition launches a preemptive war across thousands of stars, believing humanity will fracture if pushed hard enough. But this isn't a war humanity can win with one battle. It's a war measured in days without fuel, nights without heat, and choices where saving people means burning everything else. An admiral must decide how much can be lost to keep hope alive. Engineers turn survival itself into a weapon. And across the stars, ordinary people discover what it really means to endure. Join us as we explore a war that could not be won by force, only by refusing to give up. Section 1. The Map That Bled. The first warning did not arrive as a fleet on sensors or a flare across the sun. It arrived as a map changing color, one quiet pixel at a time, like bruises spreading under glass. In the unified fleet's operations vault beyond Luna's far side, Aster Gate blinked white, as if someone had erased it with care. Across the vault, officers watched the blank spot like a missing tooth, and each of them heard their own heartbeat in the hush for one beat. More markers followed, each lost landing with the same soft chime as an ordinary routing update. Technicians hunted for drive signatures or thermal bloom, anything that meant there was a ship to chase and a target to punish. The archive intelligence spoke without urgency. Priority bursts, authentication valid, origin outer spur network. Admiral Lisa Wren kept her hands clasped behind her back and said, "Play them," as if ordering weather to change. The vault filled with fractured sound, breath, static, half words pushed through damaged transmitters, then a distant impact and silence. No ships on scope, one voice swore, and that single detail stole the room's confidence. Dr. Sato Veer arrived with telemetry streaming across his tablet, collar still unsealed from a sprint. "It's not an invasion," Wren told the room. "It's a choke because Doctrine needed names to keep fear manageable," and Veer shook his head. "Not a choke," he answered softly. "Amputation," and he tapped the timing because coordination was what made humanity dangerous. The next transmission arrived clean and perfectly translated, its calmness polished to feel inevitable. "This is the covenant of 10,000 systems," it announced, acting under preemptive mandate, and it offered no rage, only procedure. Humanity had shown the capacity to unify, and unity predicted domination. It demanded that humanity stand down, decommission intersystem drives, submit colonial registries, and accept partition under custodial oversight, promising survival as a reward. Wren stared at the bleeding map and felt the strategy settle into place. Not conquest, but exhaustion. Not victory, but collapse. She turned to the archive and asked, "Time until Earth is cut off at this rate?" The AI replied, "Projected isolation in 28 days, 9 hours, and the number hung in the vault like gravity." She opened the Unity channel that had been built for parades and used it for a promise that could travel faster than panic. "They believe we break if they squeeze long enough," she said, steady enough to hold other hearts steady. "So we will become something that cannot be squeezed. We will give them a war they cannot finish." Around her, officers stopped arguing about who should lead and started speaking in verbs. Reroute, seed, salvage, share, adapt. The archive intelligence tagged the broadcast and began a new file, its title forming across the display as the map continued to bruise. Please do press that like button if you have enjoyed this story so far. That would mean a lot to me. Now back to the story. Section 2. Doctrine of Extinction. The first prisoner was not a pilot or a soldier, but a courier packet caught in transit. It slid into a lunar relay on a tight beam, carrying the right encryption and the wrong cadence. Veer's team isolated it, and peeled it open, expecting malware, threats, or coordinates for the next strike. What spilled out instead was a treaty excerpt, stamped with 1,000 seals and the force of law. In the vault, Admiral Wren listened as the archive intelligence read the translation. Preemptive mandate, it repeated. Class 7 emergent unifiers to be contained before consolidation reaches irreversible threshold. The Covenant did not call humanity an enemy. It called humanity a future. It listed probabilities, past extinctions, and a final line that tightened Wren's jaw. Mercy is permitting survival in fragments. Veer circled the table display, tapping the star map where the Covenant's corridors crossed like blades. They're not building a front, he said. They're building a schedule. Each strike targeted fuel depots, comm spines, fabrication nodes, and the quiet places where spare parts waited to become ships. He looked up at Run and added, "They want our colonies hungry, isolated, and arguing about who gets the last burn." A junior officer asked the question everyone had been avoiding. "Why now, ma'am? We beat one empire, and suddenly the galaxy panics." Rin didn't answer with pride, because pride was what the Covenant expected to punish. She answered with memory. "Because we proved we can trust each other under fire," she said, and the room went still. To them, that's the most dangerous technology we have. The Covenant's next message arrived with images. A mosaic of worlds under its banner, cities shaped in alien geometries, fleets like migrating reefs of metal. "We have ended wars by ending species," it said, politely, "and we prefer compliance." Then it offered the trap wrapped as kindness. Decommission drives and submit, or be reduced to scattered habitats that could never threaten anyone again. Rin watched the faces around her harden, not into rage, but into refusal. Outside the vault, the solar system kept turning with a deadline. On Earth, markets dipped, then steadied when people saw the unified fleet speaking with one voice instead of competing soundbites. On Mars, shipyards shifted to wartime cadence without waiting for permission, and belt unions voted to share or without bargaining for advantage. Rin stared at the Covenant's mandate and understood the real battlefield. Not space, but endurance. She leaned toward Veer and lowered her voice, so only he could hear it over the hum of the room. "If they think unity is irreversible, then we make something else irreversible," she said. Veer's eyes flicked to the map, already running simulations that did not look like victory, but like survival with teeth. The archive intelligence recorded their silence, and in that silence, a new doctrine began to form. If you have enjoyed this story so far, then please do subscribe and hit the bell icon to listen to more stories like this one. Let's get back to the story now. Section 3. Ash Logistics. The first counterstrike began in a place no admiral's portrait ever showed. A warehouse of spent parts, a hangar of half-broken drones, a ledger of shipments that never arrived. Dr. Sato Veer stood over a projection of the human network and traced the glowing trade lines like veins on an X-ray. "If we keep trying to guard every artery," he said, "they will keep cutting them until we bleed out." His proposal sounded like defeat until you listened to the second sentence. Every colony would be rebuilt as a closed loop, able to breathe on recycled air, eat from hardened hydroponics, and print what it could not mine. The unified fleet would stop treating convoys as lifelines and start treating them as bait, decoys, and rumors made of metal. Rin watched the map and felt a cold clarity settle behind her ribs. This was not a plan to win a battle, because battles belonged to the Covenant's mathematics, and their mathematics was larger than hers. It was a plan to change the war's shape, to turn every attempted siege into a bill the enemy had to keep paying. Veer laid out the lists, because lists could be acted on at speed. Belt factories would shift to modular hull plates that fit any ship. Mars would ship printer cores instead of finished weapons, and Earth would open its patents like floodgates, releasing designs once guarded like crowns. The archive intelligence pushed orders across, surviving relays and bursts. salted with false trails that looked like panic. The moral cost arrived immediately, in the same calm tone as any schedule update. Some routes would be abandoned on purpose, letting corridors go dark so the Covenant would waste fleets hunting ghosts. Rin signed the directive anyway, then opened the Unity channel and said, "No one is left behind in spirit. We will come back for what we can, when we can." In distant docks and cramped habitats, people heard the truth inside the promise and began building endurance with their own hands. They called the first wave of shipments Ash Runs, because they were made from what war had already burned. Cargo pods were packed with scrap, printer feedstock, and medical cultures, then wrapped in reflective skins to blur their heat. Escort ships carried modular bays that could swap roles mid-flight, turning from hauler to jammer to shield. Veer warned Run that the Covenant would adapt, but that was the point. "Let them learn," he said. "We will learn faster. We can change without asking 10,000 flags." Rin looked at the blinking losses and replied, "Then we make learning our weapon, and we make time our ammunition." The first Ash convoy launched toward the spur in silence, slipping through a corridor the Covenant had already declared dead. Sensors stayed dim, engines burned in ragged pulses without pause, and every ship shared the same simple order: if you are found, do not die cleanly. Somewhere in the dark, an enemy fleet turned to intercept a prize that was not a prize at all. Section 4. The Siege of Quiet Space. Quiet Space was what Belt crews called the corridor between Ceres and the Spur, a stretch so empty that even radar echoes felt lonely. The Covenant chose it for the first public execution, because nothing hid there except the facts. When the Ash convoy entered the lane, Rin's tactical map did not bruise gradually. It flashed red all at once, like a wound opened with a single cut. The archive intelligence said, "Multiple contacts, no drive plumes, vectoring to intercept," and the clock marked 9 minutes to contact, then 8, then 7. Out in the dark, Captain Imani Holt watched her sensors insist the enemy was not there, while the ship's hull rang with a rising tremor that traveled through metal like a warning prayer. The crew tasted copper and kept moving on. The Covenant did not launch missiles. It bent trajectories, nudging preceded debris into perfect impact lines that arrived silent and fast, too small to track until they were already killing. Holt ordered irregular burns, short, ugly thrusts that made no elegant curve, because prediction was the Covenant's favorite weapon. "Break your own rhythm," she told the crew, or they will break you. The convoy's lead hauler, a civilian drumship, unfolded its modular bays and locked them into a crude wall ahead of the formation. Plates meant for station repairs became ablative shields, and water tanks became mass buffers that could drink kinetic energy without blooming into lethal shrapnel. Holt's escorts dumped printer feedstock into space, a glittering cloud of carbon granules that confused rangefinders and smeared LiDAR returns into harmless static. Behind that veil, the haulers pulsed their drives in ragged bursts, each ship on a different pattern, so the Covenant's models could not lock to a single curve. Then the attackers revealed themselves, not as bright hulls, but as absence. Regions where starlight dimmed as field sails opened and drank photons for control. Holt fired at the space around that absence, launching canisters that bloomed into charged plasma sheets like luminous curtains. The sheets crawled across the Covenant's fields, forcing them to harden and show edges, and in that instant the escorts struck with rail bursts aimed at those edges. The impacts did not kill the enemy, but they forced it to retreat a half step, and in war a half step was a doorway. Time bought choices, and Holt used every second like it was oxygen. She rotated the shield wall, letting the water tanks take the worst hits, then vented the heated water as a drifting fog to blur the enemy's aim and cool the convoy's heat signature. One escort, the Kestrel, stayed behind on a dying reactor to broadcast targeting offsets until its signal went flat, a sacrifice measured in minutes and saved in lives. When the convoy cleared the lane, Rin received the Kestrel's final data dump and watched it replicate across humanity before the Covenant could even name what it had learned. Section 5, 10,000 Flags. The Covenant did not follow the ambush with a chase. It followed with ceremony. Across every relay they could still touch, they seeded a broadcast of 10,000 emblems, each a sigil for a system already folded into their order, spinning in perfect alignment like a crown of cold stars. And the audio beneath, it was a choir of harmonics tuned to feel inevitable. Beneath the flags came the same calm offer, repeated until even silence felt like agreement. Decommission your drives, register your colonies, accept custodial partition, and you may keep breathing. The message ended with a proverb, translated without menace. Order is mercy. Resistance is cruelty to yourselves. Persuasion wrapped as law. Admiral Run watched the feed in the Luna vault and felt the old human reflex rise, the urge to argue in private and posture in public. Instead, she opened the Unity channel and let the Covenant's words run beside her face, so no one could pretend it was rumor, and so no colony would feel singled out in the dark. They want you alone, she said to Earth, to Mars, to the Belt, to the outposts listening through cracked antennas, because alone is the only way their math works. Then she authorized full transparency across the network. Fuel, ship counts, losses, and decisions, signed, mirrored, and searchable, so the same truth reached every screen before fear could rewrite it. On Mars, shipwrights paused their shifts to stare at the same bleeding map, and then they went back to work with a speed that did not wait for permission, cutting old holes into new plates with hands that shook only after the shift ended. In the Belt, unions voted to share stockpiled reaction mass with colonies that had never paid their debts, and the vote was streamed in full, argument and all, so no one could sell a lie later. At Ceres, welders painted a thin black stripe on departing hulls for the escort Kestrel, a memorial that said sacrifice would be remembered, not hidden, and crews touched the stripe like a vow as they boarded. A message from a spur reached the vault after 6 relays and 3 compressions. We can't see you, but we can hear you, and that is enough to keep the lights on. The Covenant tried to answer with precision propaganda, offering individual habitats special terms if they broke from the unified net, as if survival could be auctioned by the hour. The Archive intelligence flagged the attempts and published them in the open, redacted only for names, forcing the enemy's whisper campaign into daylight where it withered, and forcing would-be traders to stare at their own signatures. Veer leaned toward Run and murmured, "If they can't fracture trust, they'll try to price it." And Rin nodded, because endurance meant refusing bargains that felt like mercy. Rin looked at the spinning emblems and said, "Let them see us choosing each other." And somewhere in the Covenant's council analysts began to realize this would not be a clean war. Section 6. The Borrowed Sun. A star can be stolen without anyone touching it, and the first time humanity understood that, it almost lost New Laconia. The colony circled a dim orange dwarf at the edge of a spur, a world of dome cities and wind-sheltered farms where what was counted twice. Every meal was grown under glass, and every harvest was scheduled like a launch window. The Covenant did not bomb the settlement. It adjusted the planet's orbit with gravity sails, a patient shove in pure mathematics that lengthened winter by minutes, then hours, until the night side turned into a slow, spreading blackout and the heaters began to ration air. Admiral Rin studied the temperature curves and recognized the trap hidden inside their calm slope, because a delayed death makes surrender feel like kindness. "They're teaching our people that obedience is warmth," she said to the vault, and Dr. Sato Veer answered with a plan that sounded like theft and mercy at the same time, his fingers trembling only after he finished speaking. 3 tankers of water and hydrogen slush would skim the dwarf at perilous range, absorb heat through sacrificial radiators, then sling inward on Burns' time to the second, while mirror kites unfolded ahead of the colony to concentrate starlight onto orbital collectors and keep the farms alive. The convoy ran dark and fast, escorted by strip cutters whose only purpose was to keep the tankers alive for one impossible arc and then die in their place if needed. And every crew signed the mission with quiet eyes and steadier hands than fear deserved. The Covenant responded with methodical violence, nudging cold debris into collision paths that looked like bad luck until the pattern emerged, and the first impact punched a fist-sized hole through a tanker skin without making a sound. Because in vacuum, even murder can be silent. Captain Imani Holt broke every rule of clean flight, venting reaction mass in ugly bursts, spilling printer feedstock into a glittering fog that smeared range-finding, and swinging a modular bay into the debris stream to take the next hits while her gunners fired into empty space to force the enemy fields to show edges. At periapsis, the dwarf filled the canopy like a bruised ember, and the ships rode the edge of its heat with radiators screaming, insulation blistering, and metal complaining in long groans that carried through every deck. A second strike sent the lead tanker into a slow tumble, and Holt fired grapples into its hull, matched the spin, and held it steady like a hand on a falling friend while her crew kept their voices calm, their burns uneven, and their engines on the edge of failure. The sling caught, the timing held, and New Laconia received its borrowed sun as superheated mass locked into orbital reservoirs, buying a season, then another, and proving to the Covenant that humanity could move warmth as well as war, and would spend itself to keep strangers alive for each other, always. Section 7. The Human Problem. The Covenant expected collapse to follow a familiar curve because it had measured that curve across 1,000 wars. First came fear, then hoarding, then blame, and finally a surrender signed by leaders who promised peace while selling their own people into quiet cages. Instead, Covenant listeners watched human channels fill with repair manuals, casualty lists, and steady voices explaining exactly what would change by morning, with every update time-stamped, signed, and mirrored so no colony heard a different truth. Every loss became a lesson, and every lesson outran the panic meant to drown it. On the Covenant command carrier vow of order, an analyst cadre gathered around a lattice display where probability trees flickered like frozen lightning. Their models kept predicting fracture, but the branches refused to bend. Each time a colony was isolated, it grew teeth, printed what it lacked, and rewired power with ugly creativity that no doctrine had authorized, turning ration schedules into manufacturing plans and fear into routine. One observer noted, with uneasy precision, the humans published their shortages in the open, making lies expensive and unity cheap, and that even grief was being cataloged into training notes. The report header they filed was blunt: the human problem. Admiral Wren read the intercepted dossier in the Luna Vault while technicians traced its origin through dead relays and cold corridors. The Covenant still had numbers that could drown her fleet, but the report's tone revealed a crack in their confidence, a need to understand why pressure was not producing surrender, and why each strike seemed to sharpen the survivors instead of softening them. They think endurance is a phase, Veer said, voice low, something you burn through until you beg, because that's how everyone else breaks. Wren underlined a sentence the analyst could not digest. Attrition events increase cohesion. Subject adapts faster than containment. And beside it she wrote, simply, we can use this. That night she issued a new order, not wrapped in poetry, but written as procedures any exhausted crew could follow. After every contact, every ship would broadcast one thing it learned. Every node would mirror the update, and every plan would reserve a slot for failure so the next crew could use it as a tool instead of shame. When an escort group slipped past a Covenant picket by running dark and steering on star field distortion alone, the method spread across human space before the enemy, finished its after-action report, and the next picket saw only ghosts. Rin closed the file and said, "If they can't break us, we break their certainty." And Veer began drafting the first knives for the enemy supply. False depots, forged fuel telemetry, and rescue beacons that led fleets in an empty distance. Cheap tricks that forced the Covenant to spend ships, time, and trust until its perfect war started to look clumsy even to its councils now. Section 8. Knives in the supply. The first knife went in as a distress call that sounded too tired to be fake. It spoke of a drifting habitat, failing life support, and a fuel cache hidden for rescue. Then it ended with a sob that made even hardened listeners lean closer. Covenant patrols pivoted at once, because their doctrine promised mercy to the obedient and efficiency to the rest. Admiral Run watched their vector change and felt the war tilt, not by firepower, but by appetite. "They cannot ignore a clean opportunity," Veer said, and his hands moved over the logistics map like a card-sharp dealing marked decks. Humanity seeded the corridor with false depots that read as full tanks, and with real depots that read as empty rocks, while the Archive intelligence salted every transmission with signatures stolen from Covenant bureaucracy. When the Covenant carrier arrived, it found nothing but a ring of cold cans and a cloud of graphite dust that smeared its ranging into useless fog. Human skirmish craft, fitted with modular bays and cheap rail pods, struck the carrier's escorts, then vanished behind irregular burns that shattered prediction. The goal was not to win a duel. It was to force the Covenant to expend fuel, drones, and time, than to make their commanders explain why a simple intercept had cost them so much. Across a dozen systems, the pattern repeated, each trap tuned to a local weakness. A beacon that lured them off lane, a counterfeit manifest that made them guard empty cargo, a decoy convoy that bled them into months of pursuit. With every overreaction, coalition fleets began to distrust their own reports, because the universe kept lying in ways their rigid chain of command could not admit. Rin broadcast one sentence to every human node: make them spend certainty. The Covenant answered with harsher orders, tightening discipline, threatening captains who returned without trophies, and demanding decisive results that the math could no longer guarantee. That pressure did what Rin hoped. It turned the enemy inward, making caution look like cowardice and truth look like sabotage. Intercepts captured arguments in alien voices, accusations, audits, and quiet fear that the war was becoming unclean. Humanity paid for every knife with real blood, and Rin refused to let the cost be hidden behind cleverness. She ordered rescue windows even during raids, pulling wounded enemies for broken hulls when it did not risk the convoy, and broadcasting the footage without commentary, so every colony saw the same faces in vacuum, and remembered why unity mattered, even as the casualty counters climbed and the comm line shook. "If we become monsters to win," she told Veer, "then we lose something we can't rebuild." And he only nodded, because endurance meant staying human longer than the galaxy expected. On the map, new red arcs curved toward Mars, and the Archive warned that the next squeeze would target the shipyards that fed every corridor today. Section 9. The Long Night of Mars. Mars went dark in a way that cameras could not explain. The planet still glowed with city lights, but the space around it filled with blind spots, as if someone had painted silence across the lanes that fed it. The Covenant did not bomb the shipyards. It wrapped them, building an interdiction shell from stealth sails and redirected rubble that moved like patient teeth. In the Luna Vault, Admiral Lisa Run watched Mars burn bright on the map, while its corridors darkened to nothing. The first Martian Council call arrived on a thin carrier that dropped syllables, and a speaker's calm voice fought hard to stay calm. "We can hold Phobos dock for 12 days, they said, and Dr. Sato Veer's models turned that estimate into a verdict for everyone who depended on Martian life support. If Mars lost its yards, The unified fleet would bleed replacement hulls until Earth stood alone. If Mars stayed locked, millions in orbitals and canyon habitats would run out of scrubbers and reactor filters long before rescue was possible. The Covenant had engineered a choice that felt like a trap, no matter which way a human stepped. Wren opened a private channel to Phobos and asked for Dockmaster Yara Klein. Klein did not plead. She listed weld crews, unfinished hulls, and how many rail cores could be cannibalized if the fleet forced one more ash run through the shell. Wren let the numbers sit, then said, "I'm choosing the people, not the steel," and the silence that followed felt heavy. "Then give me a task," Klein said, and Wren answered, "Hold 12 days, then burn the docks yourself and run for the evacuation train." The evacuation became a choreography of miracles. Tugs pulled habitat rings into a chain. Masked drivers on Deimos threw pallets of scrubbers toward rendezvous points, and escorts ran hot and loud to drag enemy fields away. Captain Holt cutters dove into Mars's thin atmosphere to aero brake behind dust storms, vanishing from sensors that could not read turbulence well. In the evacuation trains, grown men and women sat strapped beside toolkits and seed cases, listening to the unified feed count departures and name the missing. No one cheered when a habitat ring cleared the shell. They just exhaled, then checked the next marker, because endurance was breath by breath. When panic tried to rise, Martian medics and belt engineers spoke into cameras and said plainly, "Keep moving, keep sharing, keep looking at the same truth." On the 12th day, Phobos dock flared like a second moon as Klein's crews opened coolant lines and pushed the reactors into an irreversible climb. Wren watched the shipyard marker go blank and filed the loss in the open ledger where every colony could see it, because grief had to be shared to hold unity. Far from Mars, Covenant fleets turned to chase the fleeing train, and the archive intelligence whispered that the enemy had committed too much mass to one pursuit, and that a trap was now possible. Section 10. The Attrition Trap. The Covenant announced its final lesson with a message so confident it almost sounded like relief. It named a rendezvous beyond Jupiter, promised a decisive engagement, and offered a single corridor for honorable withdrawal if humanity chose to live in fragments. The galaxy, it implied, would watch and learn what happens to emergent unifiers when they refuse containment. In the Luna Vault, officers began to talk like people standing on a cliff, arguing over whether to jump or be pushed. A battle that would be clean, visible, and catastrophic, and the Covenant wanted it for the same reason it wanted flags and mandates: proof. Admiral Wren let the arguments run, then asked one question, quiet enough to make everyone lean in: what happens if we do not give them a finale? Dr. Veer answered with a smile that never reached his eyes. "Then we turn their arena into a drain," he said, and he pulled up a second map that looked wrong, full of empty routes and abandoned depots. Humanity would arrive at Jupiter with fewer ships than the Covenant expected, but with more traps than it could imagine. False heat signatures, modular mines built from salvage, and decoy transponders that multiplied in the dark like a rumor. Wren nodded once, and the room stopped arguing and started counting. The unified fleet split into scattered packs and slid into the arena on irregular burns, each group broadcasting a different story. One pack looked like a desperate massing of fighters, another like a convoy begging to be saved, and a third like nothing at all until it was close enough to matter. The Covenant surged to meet the main force, and in doing so it exposed its escorts to the one thing its doctrine hated: uncertainty. Captain Holt's cutter struck first, not at hulls, but at assumptions. They dumped clouds of carbon dust and filament mesh that tangled sensor solutions, then launched cold canisters that unfolded into reflective sails, making empty space look crowded and targets look doubled. When Covenant fields hardened to cut through the haze, rail fire hit the revealed edges, and the enemy spent fuel correcting vectors that should never have existed. Hours stretched into a day, and the Covenant's perfect battle became a series of small, exhausting corrections. Every time it pushed forward, a new decoy dragged it sideways. Every time it tightened formation, modular mines forced it to spread. Every time it tried to retreat, human packs harried the edges and vanished. Rin never offered a charge, never gave the Covenant a single line to break, and the arena became what Veer promised, a bill that kept coming due. By the second day, Covenant captains were requesting resupply and permission to disengage, and coalition overseers refused, demanding the promised proof. Rin listened to the intercepted arguments and felt the enemy's unity begin to creak under its own certainty. "Hold," she told her fleet, voice steady on the shared channel. "We are not winning by killing them fast. We are winning by making them stay." Section 11. Endurance Doctrine. By the third day in the Jupiter arena, the Covenant's advantage began to rot in plain sight. Their fleets were still larger and smoother in formation, but their command chain was a single spine, and every twitch had to be approved by councils that demanded certainty. Humanity, by contrast, had become a swarm of small decisions, each one imperfect, fast, and shared the moment it worked. The enemy had numbers, humans had momentum. Admiral Run turned that sharing into law and made it simple enough to survive exhaustion. After every contact, every ship broadcast a learned packet of 5 lines. What the enemy did, what failed, what succeeded, what it cost, and what to try next, signed by a living officer and mirrored by the archive intelligence. Packet 771 read, "Photon sail edges reveal under plasma curtains. Rail hits force retreat. Carbon dust buys 13 seconds. Cost: 1 bay module. Vent heated water to blur aim." Never matched their rhythm twice. Before the Covenant corrected its next intercept vector, those 5 lines had been copied to 200 hulls, translated into printer code, and turned into fresh fittings bolted on by crews who were still shaking. Factories on Earth shifted their queues without waiting for a vote, because the packets arrived with proof, not slogans, and proof travels well through tired hands. On the night shift, operators paused beside humming printer banks, read the same 5 lines as the admirals, then fed in scrap, swapped nozzles, and pushed out a new batch of decoy canisters while news screens quietly counted the missing. Mars evac crews, now scattered through orbitals and borrowed habitats, sent back tricks for mass sharing and emergency scrubber rebuilds. And those tricks showed up as printer updates and ship holds within hours, stamped with names so gratitude had somewhere to land. The Covenant tried to jam the flow by flooding channels with noise and false translations. But human nodes compared hashes, rejected forgeries, posted the sabotage attempts in the open ledger, and Rin kept the casualty list public anyway. So no rumor could claim betrayal where there was only sacrifice. On the Covenant carrier vow of order, analysts filed a new report, and this time it trembled, as if even their ink feared to be wrong in the cold dark too. Subject converts attrition into acceleration. It read, "Coalition cohesion degrades under prolonged uncertainty. Decisive victory required. Decisive victory not achievable without unacceptable expenditure. Captains requested resupply they could not get without admitting they had been tricked, and overseers answered with threats instead of solutions, because pride was cheaper than fuel and punishment was faster than thinking." Rin sent a short order to every node. Hold, learn, and prepare for synchronized misdirection, while Veer gave a name in plain language, and the archive stamped the schedule for all to see. Make everywhere expensive now. Section 12. A war you cannot finish. The synchronized inversion began as a whisper in the unified feed, a simple list of times and vectors that looked ordinary until it happened everywhere at once, from the Jupiter arena to the spur and back to the bruised lanes near Mars. Across human space, convoys that were retreating turned 90 degrees into darkness, decoys that were lost lit up on purpose, and stations that looked abandoned woke with fresh power and fresh guns. So the map stopped bleeding in one place and began bleeding in 10. Covenant commanders watched their perfect arrows kink and fold. And the first question in their encrypted chatter was not how to kill, but how to trust their own eyes. Their algorithms demanded clean conclusions, and humans gave them only shifting costs. Admiral Wren did not ask for a final charge, because a charge would give the Covenant a story to end and a symbol to break, and symbols are easy to burn when you have 10,000 systems behind you. Instead, she ordered a patient closing of doors. Minefields assembled from salvage around false depots, sensor fog seated in every lane the enemy favored, and emergency beacons that dragged coalition fleets off clean routes and into empty distance where their resupply clocks kept ticking. Captain Imani Holt's pack struck the edge escorts just hard enough to force wasteful burns, while other human ships slipped past to sever tenders, steal reaction mass, and leave drifting decoy beacons that made pursuit feel mandatory. And Veer's crews kept moving the hidden supply math underneath it all. On Covenant Council nets, the war stopped sounding like procedure and started sounding like argument. Because attrition makes even empires count, and accountants do not salute flags. Systems that had pledged ships demanded to know why their fleets were vanishing into decoy chases, why resupply quotas doubled, and why humans kept returning after losses that should have ended them, as if stubbornness were a renewable resource. Overseers answered with discipline and blame, but discipline could not print fuel, and blame could not shorten corridors. And the coalition began to crack along the same lines it had once used to promise unity. Wren opened the Unity Channel one last time, not for triumph, but for witness, so every colony would hear the same ending and keep the same truth, even the ones still running on rationed light. "They came to petition us," she said, voice rough with sleepless months, and we answered by refusing to vanish. Then she offered ceasefire windows wherever coalition units disengaged and safe corridors for any fleet that chose to withdraw, with the terms published in full and signed in the open ledger. The Covenant did not surrender. It fractured. Withdrawal orders arrived from rival councils. Fleets peeled away to defend their own homes. And on the 30th day, the last hostile carrier turned its photon sails from Sol, leaving humanity alive, united, and unfinishable. Please do press that like button if you have enjoyed this story, and also please do subscribe and hit the bell icon to listen to more stories like this one. That would mean a real lot to me. Now go ahead and listen to your next story here.